What really lights you up about still working in the Bitcoin space?
For me, it's that I think it is the number one technology that will improve liberty around the world. There are multiple nation states stacking Bitcoin. There are large companies stacking Bitcoin. There are large pensions stacking Bitcoin. Now, it's early. And don't forget, just like most people, a lot of people make mistakes of having to shitcoin or blockchain technology, or maybe they think they need to do mining, but they don't know how to. They'll make all the same mistakes. This can happen at nation state level also.
Welcome back to another episode of Hosting Bitcoin. Today we have Stephan Livera. Stephan is one of the most well-known and earliest Bitcoin educators, and his ability to bridge the gap between these highly technical pioneers in our space and communicate what they share with him simply so that we can all follow along is unparalleled. He's the host of the Stephan Livera podcast, where he's constantly engaging with experts and discussing the intricate aspects of Bitcoin and economic theory. Professionally, he was a chartered public accountant with Deloitte and is currently an advisor to Bull Bitcoin. And today, he's here to share his perspective with us amid some incredible evolutions in our space. Stephan, welcome to Hosting Bitcoin.
Thanks for having me.
Really appreciate you coming on. I'm really excited to talk to you in general, but I'm also very excited because this is a crazy historic day. For context, we got an executive order signed yesterday for the National Strategic Bitcoin Reserve for the US. And I would love to just hear your thoughts on that because that's been a long time coming.
Sure. So I think there was a lot of back and forth. Are they going to do it? Will they or won't they? Right? That was are they really going to do it? And if they do, are they just going to hold the existing seized coins, or are they actually going to take steps to, and it's been a bit of a roller coaster ride because, the price has been running up and down. There was at one point Trump posted on Truth Social, and he posted about these shitcoins, right? Ethereum and Sol and whatever else. And people were kind of like, what? Why is he so positive on those? And then when you actually look at what, the text of what was actually in the executive order and the fact sheet, it was actually almost a total maximalist victory when you think about it. Because the boiled down version of it is basically the US government will hold the coins that have already been seized. They will look for revenue neutral ways to acquire more coins, and Bitcoin is being treated separately from shitcoins, aka crypto, and I think they've even specified that they're not necessarily going to be buying more of the shitcoins. So I mean, as far as the kind of the Bitcoin maxi checklist, that's pretty much everything. Now, I will say there are some, and I think it's a fair point. There are some, let's say, in the more purist libertarian camp, and I respect that view, which is actually the government should not hold any coins. Actually, it should just be left to the individuals. You should not be encouraging the state to hold this thing. But, I mean, where I land on it at the end of the day, though, is that it's a huge step forward whichever way you slice it, because, remember, there's been a big Overton window shift. Just a few years ago, people were debating, is the government going to ban Bitcoin? Now, that's completely out of the question. And now, it's just about how much Bitcoin is the government going to acquire, and are they going to do much with shitcoins, yes or no? And so, on the downside, now, to be clear, I'm an Australian, I'm not an American. I live in Dubai, so, this is the view of an outsider per se, but I'm just trying to obviously, I guess I'm an outsider of America, but I'm somewhat of an insider in the Bitcoin world, let's say. So I'm kind of obviously interested to know what's happening. So my view on what's going to happen is that there's going to be a lot of scams and shitcoins over the next few years. It seems a very quote-unquote pro-crypto environment, and so that means, there's a lot of scamming going on. Trump coin, Melania coin, you name it coin. But the silver lining for us in Bitcoin is it's going to be a permissive environment. So I expect that the government will do a lot less in terms of going after legitimate Bitcoin founders, Bitcoin builders, Bitcoin developers, people who are doing mining, just everyday node runners. I think it's a very pro-crypto environment. And so on that side, we can be grateful, right? So yes, the purist libertarian and purist cypherpunk people may not be as excited about this, but the silver lining is the government is going to mostly let you play with your bitcoins, as Trump says.
I love that. And I was talking with my wife last night, and it was like I kind of always thought that this would happen on some time scale, but I was thinking like 10 or 20 years in the future at the shortest. And like you said, even a couple of years ago, we were actively just having to defend ourselves from whether there would be a total ban or some kind of really punitive of way of regulating this thing. What do you think about the timeline? I mean, could you have seen this coming from even a couple of years ago?
So I'm going to answer this by pointing, like, when I came into Bitcoin, when I was a noob in 2013, when I bought my first coins, I think I was, just like a lot of people, I was extremely exuberant, right? Like many people, I was shouting from the rooftops. I was trying to get anyone to listen to me about Bitcoin. Very few people did. Those people who did are very happy, but nevertheless, I think a similar cycle is going to play out. And so in some ways, when you first come into Bitcoin and you first, as in seriously take the orange pill, not just kind of have a surface level, when you first dive deep into it and try to learn and understand, you often get over bullish because you think everything's going to happen so quickly. Isn't it so obvious? Fiat currency is so bad. Bitcoin is so good. Why won't the whole world just instantly jump over into Bitcoin with us? Because we see the light. No, actually, they won't. It's going to take time. So I think that has been one of the lessons I've learned, which is actually, no, slow it down. Of course, I'm bullish on Bitcoin, but have realistic expectations. Because I think, and actually, this is where I take some issue with some of the people in the community nowadays, or people online commenting who are like, "Oh yeah, 1 million this year." No, like you're setting people up with the wrong expectation, or a very unlikely. Right? It's possible, but it's very, very, very unlikely in my view. Right? I don't think you should be betting your net worth on the idea that we're hitting 1 million this year. This kind of thing. No, of course I'm bullish. But I think we have to be realistic. So I guess that to answer your question, it's more just that you think it's going to be super fast, but actually it takes time for people to really do their learning and even go through a bear cycle before they've really actually learned that Bitcoin is here to stay. And there'll be all these new people coming in. For them, it's their first time. And they are going to have to go through, they're going to have to earn their stripes, or however the saying goes.
I totally agree with you. And one of the strange things to me is that it feels like this is such a late stage thing to happen. A national strategic reserve specifically for the US is something that I would have expected at a market cap where we're looking at $1 million coin price or something like that. And it's surprising to me that we would hit that kind of milestone when we're still at less than 1% penetration of global assets. So that's one thing that I'm kind of grappling with, is where actually are we in the life cycle of this thing, and how can we square the circle of this is one of the biggest moves that can happen for this space versus we're still so early.
So a few points I want to make here. I am more recently, let's say, in the power law camp. I'm in the diminishing returns camp, right? Now, for some people, they don't like that because it's like, oh, you're a bear or whatever. But I think it's just, it's a predictable outcome. Like, the system is growing and it's going to grow slower and be less volatile, right? Diminishing returns, diminishing volatility. And if you look statistically, if you just look at the month-on-month stats of that over the last, 16 years or maybe 15 that Bitcoin's had a price, the volatility is coming down over time. We should expect, this kind of diminishing returns thing. And if anything, it just kind of shows that Bitcoin is going to this new level. And in order to even sustain that pathway, it's going to need larger and larger pools of capital, larger and larger actors to come in, right? It's not just Michael Saylor now, right? There are multiple nation states stacking Bitcoin. There are large companies stacking Bitcoin. There are large pensions stacking Bitcoin. There are individual states inside of the US who will likely stack Bitcoin. Now, it's early. And don't forget, just like most people, a lot of people make mistakes of having to shitcoin or blockchain technology, or maybe they think they need to do mining, but they don't know how to. They'll make all the same mistakes. This can happen at nation state level also. So I think people who are going into this thinking that, oh, see, the US government is going to be a bunch of, laser eye, hodl forever, never sell. I mean, you gotta be wary with that, right? I'll give you another example. Look at Bhutan. Now, Bhutan arguably played it well, right? They were mining Bitcoin, and that more recently, let's say, I can't remember the exact stats, but let's say 4 or 5 years ago, they might have started, and then I think it sort of came out maybe 1 or 2 years ago, something like this. Now, I think I saw there was recently a clip going around, which you might have seen or listeners might have seen. I think they had a couple like government officials from Bhutan and like the Sovereign Wealth Fund guy talking about how they used some of that Bitcoin to spend to pay government employees in Bhutan. So some of them will spend, right? Like you can't. So I mean, if you believe it's money, people are going to spend it too. So and of course there will be kind of the false starts, right? So for example, remember El Salvador was first. And then soon after them, there was Central African Republic, right? So they came out with a big announcement being like, yeah, we're going to do Bitcoin legal tender too. And then actually they started their own shitcoin. It was like some Sango coin, something, whatever, right? The point is, almost every country, every company is going to go through that life cycle. Or even, I'll give you another example, Fidelity. When they first came into Bitcoin, off the top of my head, they might have had people looking at it more seriously from maybe 2014, 2015. They were relatively early, but they were, again, into kind of this idea of, oh, do we need to mine it? Do we need to do blockchain technology or whatever? Now, of course, they have, now they've got a big custodian, Fidelity assets, and now they're putting out, Bitcoin thought leadership pieces and, all kinds of things, right? And of course, got a big ETF. So it's a learning, it's a process. And so each, phase, each new thing, it requires a new level of people coming in. And that can be the size of the actor, that can be, the amount of investment, because maybe when you start, as is typical, people, they dip their toe. And then after it's kind of worked out for them, oh, okay, let me turn it up a little bit. And then eventually, after a while, for many people, you end up very highly allocated to Bitcoin. And that's just the natural cycle. And so whether you are an individual, whether you are a company or a nation state, I think many of them will go through that same cycle.
In many ways, it seems like this is really just the starting line for the move as well. I think you had a tweet like, if you think that we're going to a million overnight or way low overnight, you're wrong. Either way, this is something that takes time to play out. This is an announcement. This is not something that you see immediate results for. If anything, this is just a long-term structural move, and we're still quite early in it.
Yeah. Let me put a bit of context to that, a bit of meat on that bone, because let's say assuming the government holds approximately 200,000 coins, and quick asterisk, part of those coins are actually technically might be owned by Bitfinex. So there is kind of a debate, or I'm not sure the exact, will those Bitcoin be given back to Bitfinex, or will they do some kind of settlement and say, no, we'll just pay you out the fiat value as of 2016 or whenever the Bitfinex hack was, right? Anyway, whatever. Call it 200K. Nevertheless, I don't know how much more accumulation the government will be able to do without some kind of legislation, right? And then now if we look at Cynthia Lummis's bill, I think that bill is something like 200 to buy 200,000 coins per year for the next 4 years. So even that is not like kind of, blowing it out of the water. Of course, now maybe you could look at, okay, hypothetical. Let's say Cynthia Lummis gets that bill passed through and it's 200K coins per year, and other nation states really start following soon afterwards. Okay, maybe then you start to see, some serious moves, but it's just going to take time, right? Even 200,000, even if we got if that bill comes through, the point is 200K coins per year on the grand scheme is not that large, right? Like there would be a lot of, because think about it like this, right? Once you get up to certain levels in terms of price, there's probably like a bunch of OGs or long-term hodlers who are like, oh, hey, you know what? I've reached a level that maybe they want to, buy something for themselves, or they want to buy a house or buy a car or whatever it is. And so they will naturally sell off to the new entrants. And so I just think it's all part of the cycle of things.
What do you think the next biggest thing that could happen is? Because I can't personally think of anything that's on this order of magnitude, other than maybe just completely removing taxes on the space.
Yeah, I mean, that would be huge. Now, it seems unlikely for now. There has been some talk about that, but I don't know how serious. Or I think Trump made some like loose, promises or maybe kind of offhand comments in a talk, but I don't know if he sort of said this is a campaign promise, right? He's not going to say promises made, promises kept on the capital gains thing. So of course that would be great. Obviously, from a libertarian perspective, I think that is the more principled thing to push for, is to say no capital. We should have no capital gains, because then, if you think about what sound money means, it means money chosen by the market, and secondarily, it means money free of state intervention. And capital gains tax is a big intervention, so that would be big. But I think it's really just now it's more like they're off zero, but how far did they turn that knob? Right? It's the same thing as, when you or I got started, maybe you dip your toe and then later you sort of realize, okay, actually I should have more of this. And I think we're just early stages on that at the nation state level. And of course, still early stages of that for things like pension funds, large, insurance companies, and of course, just general companies. Because, I mean, there's not that many Bitcoin treasury companies right now. There should be more, right? Michael Saylor was talking about this in August 2020 or around mid 2020, and there's still not that many companies. Yeah, there's a few, but there's just not that many, and it just shows you how early we are.
Considering how, I mean, $1 billion is still large, but considering how small they were in context, it's wild to think that they are still the largest private company, well, public company, but still the largest company that's holding it on their balance sheet. You would have expected, just through game theory, that somebody else would have come along with a larger balance sheet and started really going ahead of them, because there was plenty of opportunity to. So that to me speaks to this, like, yes, you can have amazing announcements that really move the narrative forward, but there's still a lot of catch up. There's still a lot of inertia to actually get this very widespread. I'm curious for you as well. What do you see as, because the government ban risk was kind of our biggest overhanging fear for the space. What do you consider the biggest risks that we still face?
Honestly, I don't really see any big risks, to be honest. I think, of course, don't be complacent. Keep trying to, make sure that people are trying to keep the space decentralized and make sure they're, building out self-custody and, of course, being able to do things like peer-to-peer. I think it's probably fair to say privacy aspects of Bitcoin are... they're going to be difficult. I think they are just going to be difficult. Now, I'm not against people building out privacy technology. I'm hopeful to see more adoption of things like PayJoin, silent payments, and just generally L2 usage, things like Lightning and Arc and maybe other L2s that may come. But I'm not sure that the privacy-focused cypherpunks will get all their wishes on this one. I think we may unfortunately end up in a world where there's still a lot of AML and sanctions compliance and all these kinds of things that, and I've been long against these kinds of things. Again, from a libertarian perspective, I think they're anti-liberty, they're ineffective, they are extremely, extremely costly, they don't actually stop that much crime, but there's a lot of money to be made, and a lot of kind of captured interests that are kind of pushing these things, like from the FATF, Financial Action Task Force, and a lot of the AML regulators around the world. They're kind of all kind of marching forward and putting in more KYC, more AML. Is there a risk of kind of a white market of coins and a black market of coins? And could that also flow through at the mining level, right? Would they try to impose censorship at the mining pool level? Those are maybe open questions. And I think as let's say, Bitcoin educator, advocate, community, whatever you're calling this, it would be good to try to focus on that and at least call attention to those things, and hopefully that can be improved over time. So that, put it this way, I believe Bitcoin is on the path to become global money, but the privacy part of it, we may not get everything we wanted there. But I'm taking it like a glass half full approach, and look, I still think that is a huge win from an economic and liberty perspective. Prosperous, yeah, how prosperous the world will be when we're on a Bitcoin standard. But I think that could be decades away, like for the full transition to happen. But we're living through it, and it's an exciting and amazing time to be here.
Bitcoin mining allows you to acquire Bitcoin at a lower cost than buying Bitcoin outright and produces consistent results. At Abundant Minds, we take care of setup, maintenance, and performance so that your miners can run efficiently. It's a straightforward way to grow your Bitcoin stack without the guesswork. Book a call to start now. So like any engineering problem, you've got to make trade-offs. You're not going to every time optimize for every single aspect of what you're trying to design for. But
Correct.
In your view, you don't feel like there are existential risks at this point, whether it be scaling or some kind of technology risk, nothing that really makes you existentially worried about Bitcoin itself.
Not really. Now, of course, to be clear, there are things that should be addressed, right? The obvious one that basically nobody can deny is the Unix timestamp bug, but that's like 70 or 80 years away. There'll be a hard fork for that. Our children or grandchildren will end up doing that one. Now, is there a risk of the quantum stuff before then? Maybe. I see some people who say, no, that's all a scam, or that's kind of way overhyped, and other people are more like, no, it's a serious thing. We should think about it and try to have some kind of quantum readiness protocols and proposals and things. And so there are people like Hunter Beast talking about that kind of thing. And from the scaling perspective, I think what we have now is enough to become global money, but I'm not personally an ossifier. Like, I would be okay with... I think the way AJ Towns frames it as a slow and steady kind of approach, or Steve Lee also kind of sees it that way. So I think eventually when we're ready, maybe something like a CTV, maybe something like something that enables more advanced forms of Lightning, or maybe something for the hodler side, something like Vault or CCV. Maybe in time, those would be accepted and there would be consensus around that. But yeah, for now, it doesn't seem that there's immediate consensus to sort of do some kind of soft fork. But I also, at the same time, don't think there's like an immediate burning need to do those things, because there's a lot of other things that people can and should be doing to support Bitcoin, use Bitcoin. We have a lot of headroom right now. So I don't see any, big risks, to be honest. I see some things that the network and the community and the developers will deal with when the time comes. But I'm confident that they'll be dealt with.
So we've heard a lot about the quantum computing concern lately, and I don't think we need to beat that one to death. But I am curious. I have not heard of the Unix timestamp bug. Can you go a little bit into that just to kind of educate on what that is?
Sure. So I wouldn't be able to explain at a technical level, but it relates to, I think, the way blocks are timestamped. And so basically, it's kind of like a very loose analogy like the Y2K bug. Right, so it's kind of like that, but I think it's the actual risk of it is gonna happen in like 70 or 80 years, something like. It's called the Y2038 bug, but the actual, based on the the Unix timestamp, it's gonna happen at like 2100 or something like this, right? So it's a while off, and it just relates to, I think, the block header timestamp, and I think that's what has to get upgraded at that time, but. This is seen as like a very, very trivial thing that basically, closer to that time, people will coordinate and do an upgrade for that. And it'll be trivial because everyone would like, people would not really disagree on doing that fix.
So similar to Y2K, potentially a very fearful thing, but very unlikely to be a technically difficult thing to solve.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Got it. Okay. At this point, I mean, you've been in the space now for over a decade. I really admire when someone can not just stay committed to something, but also stay committed to educating about something for such a long period of time. What still makes you excited about speaking in this space and helping people understand it? Like what really lights you up about still working in the Bitcoin space?
For me, it's that I think it is the number one technology that will improve liberty around the world. And it's going to do it in an indirect way. Whereas I think a lot of libertarians are sort of thinking, oh, you've got to do the party politics thing. Or no, I think this is actually, if you are a libertarian, you want the size of the state to be smaller. How do you do that? You take away the printer. You take away the power of seigniorage. And Bitcoin does do that. And so I think if you're a libertarian and you're not focused on Bitcoin as at least one of the most important planks in your strategy, you're making a mistake. And so I think a lot of libertarians who maybe they get caught up in some other issues of the day, and it's okay to, I'm not saying every libertarian must become a Bitcoin podcaster, but they should all they should all appreciate and encourage their followers and their listeners. Hey, you should get into this Bitcoin thing, because once we get adoption of that at a broad level, I think it will dramatically lower the size of the state, because guess what? You're taking away the printer. You're taking away their debt and seigniorage income, which is basically when they print money, they get to be the first ones to spend it. And so I think, a lot of people, sometimes they almost confuse it a bit when they talk about, oh, you're spending taxpayer money. Well, yeah, obviously, yes, that can be a problem, but it's not just explicit taxes that governments are spending, right? Especially in the US government case, they are being able to create new money and funnel it into causes that the government wants. And so that is almost like, that is this, this hidden tax that is hitting all people who hold dollars, and especially people who are saving into dollars. And to be honest, a lot of even standard investments are not keeping pace with fiat inflation. If you look at base money expansion, it might be like 9 or 10% a year over time, like longer term. And so if your investments aren't beating that, you're losing pace, you're losing ground. And so from a liberty perspective, and just from a general, wanting people to have a chance at economic prosperity, wanting people to have a chance at having a family, having children, these kinds of things, they're so important. And I think now, obviously, the whole birth rates, fertility issue is kind of getting more prominent now. A lot of people are talking about it. Elon is all about it. A lot of people are talking about it. And so I think part of that is the breakdown of institutions that were previously helping uphold these things. So obvious example, the family. Obvious examples, things like religious communities, things, all kinds of other communities that served a role, other non-state institutions. And unfortunately, whether it was intentional or not, those non-state institutions were undermined by the state. So for example, the welfare state undermines the family, and so the family becomes less important, and now it's all about, government is now your daddy or your mummy. And government tells you what to do, not the family authority, let's say. And so I see it as it's a shift of the power from the state in favor of individuals and families and communities. And so I believe that is so important. And so that's why, for me, I'm still shouting from the rooftops.
Beautiful painting of the problem that we're here to solve. And I would love it if you could give me what does the vision of the future look like if we are successful in removing that flaw from the system, or the flawed structure within the system?
I believe we are going to go back in some ways, return, or as the meme is, right? The return with the V, right? But it's a bit of a meme online, but the point is more just like there are certain, I think, family and community structures that maybe we have to bring those back. It's, a lot of people are finding it difficult because they're so atomized. They feel like, I can't afford to have, let's say, people might feel like cost of living is rising and they can't afford to have their wife stay at home. Or maybe they can't find they feel like they can't afford to support a family. Or maybe their job situation is so unstable that they are uncomfortable to, try and marry and have children and do all of these things. So I think that's going to be a big change. I think we may see a return back to some more traditional, let's say, gender roles. We may see, I think, a return to this idea that you should be a specialist in your area, whatever it is, whether you're a dentist or a doctor or a lawyer or accountant or whatever. Now, of course, AI is another whole conversation, but the point is you should be able to focus on your work and not have to also be an investment manager. Whereas today, you have to be, because otherwise you're getting wrecked by the printer. And so why is it that so many people are crazy about like property investing, and there's so many, there's all these YouTubes about, be an Airbnb, short-term rental, whatever guy, or be a property flipping guy, or, do the stocks and be a dividend investor here, or, because I think the reason for that is, again, we don't have a proper money. We have an inferior fiat currency. It's pushing people out to do all these crazy things. And that has caused this, inflation, this expansion, this use of things like property as an alternate store of value. And, of course, you and I, and maybe in our little echo chamber, we see Bitcoin as the pristine, the premier, the best store of value. But a lot of people are still in this mindset of, property is safe, or stocks are the way, or bonds, the worst thing because you're funding the state, right? And also getting wrecked while you're doing it. So it's just like really bad. I mean, these people are they're buying government bonds because they think it's safer, but they're really not safer. They're just guaranteeing a loss. So I think these are some of the things that will change. And then I think once you shift out of the fiat currency system that has to keep expanding and keep inflating, then we're going to go back to a certain level of actual sustainability in the real sense of it. I'll give you another example. Welfare states are a massive Ponzi. They are not sustainable. And so there's a big argument even now about welfare states around the world, right? In Europe, it's this question of, if they want to go to war with, Russia and Putin, then can they afford to have a welfare state and a warfare state? Probably not, because they're in a lot of debt. And in the US case, there's these questions of, Doge and trying to cut back, and how much spending cuts can they do? Now, of course, Trump has said he's not going to cut, I think, Medicare, Medicaid, and a bunch of these things. But, I mean, as I'm going to borrow Lynn Alden's saying, nothing stops this train, right? Like, there's just so much government debt, there's so much entitlement in that system that I wish Elon and the team all the success in Doge and cutting down the size of the state. But I think fundamentally it's going to be a really hard thing. Now, welfare states are going to go the way of the dodo. The likely situation might be that they try to buy them out. Maybe I've heard people talk about this term of like an actuarially favorable buyout. So they might say, well, look, okay, we know you are supposed to get these benefits, but why don't you take this payout now? And it's based on the calculation, whatever. It's favorable to you. Just take this payout now so that we can take this liability off of our books and not have to think about it in the future. It's kind of like saying we'll buy you out. And then maybe the younger generations, they may even have to sign up to just saying, hey, I sign up to still pay into this system, but I will not actually get anything out of that system because there won't be anything for you, right? That's literally how bad things have gotten in many parts of the world, right? I'll give you another example. In the Australian context, so they have a superannuation system. Basically, it's like a forced savings thing that employers have to chip into on behalf of the employees. Currently, it's about 12% of their salary goes into this superannuation. I think it's kind of like, it's basically the retirement savings. So for Americans, it's like 401k and all that kind of thing. But this is becoming a massive pot of funds. And guess what? They're going to get into a lot of debt. Politicians are going to look at that pot of funds and say, hey, I want to tap that. I want to say, hey, let me redirect some of those funds to government bonds. You plebs, you should fund the state. You should fund the roads, right? These are the kind of conversations that I think are going to come over the next few decades. But the welfare states of the world will need a serious reform or an ending, ideally an ending. But Bitcoin will form an important alternative to those. I also think there'll be some interesting impacts at a cultural level, because part of the reason like investing in all these other things is so popular is there's massive leverage available. Once you take that fiat leverage away and we're in a hard money, Bitcoin standard, full reserve system, debt won't be so cheap. And so actually there will be this kind of patronage of the wealthy people, right? In the same way that, in centuries gone by, the rich people funded maybe the big cathedral, and it was this huge project that took decades or like 100 years to build this cathedral, or to build, a bridge, or the water supply for the town, or whatever. Like, we're going to see this kind of patronage factor of wealthy people who have decided, well, I can't actually earn that much more by going out and taking leverage, because leverage is not cheap anymore. So, I'm going to fund this charitable venture and that charitable venture. And, I think it'll just be actually an interesting thing even from a cultural and an artistic perspective.
Man, I so resonate with everything you just said, and it brought up so much for me. Having an engineering background, having spent time in the real estate world, even just the idea of overcomplicating things to try to get an outcome. When Elon's talking about designing a system or, improving a rocket engine, the adage is take out as many parts until it doesn't work, or as many parts as you can, the fewest amount of parts to make it work, but no less than that. And same with people like Rick Rubin when they're designing music or crafting art. It's like only the essential components and simplicity. And especially in like the real estate space, the trading space, all of these different investment strategies, you find that it's just disgustingly complicated because people are trying to figure out how to get ahead when they really should just be focusing on what they're able to do with their unique skill set. And the kind of sinister part of it is, at least when I was in the real estate space, usually the most successful people in the room were the people that were selling the courses, not the people who were actually doing the deals, right?
Selling the proverbial picks and shovels, right?
Yeah, and if you're trying to just sell a course that says go buy Bitcoin, that's a pretty short curriculum, so it's not quite as successful as a model. But I've found, at least in my personal life, that the simpler that I can be with decision making, the more focused that I can be, the better the outcomes usually are, and the happier that I am. And it's unfortunate how prevalent it is that people have to just scatter their focus among as many different things as they possibly can just to keep up, just to have a sense of, can I even get ahead in the system?
Yeah, I think it's unfortunate. And the other element of it, I think, coming back to the fiat printer problem, is that it creates this really bad incentive where the brightest minds are not working on the latest scientific thing because that's not where the money is. So they all end up in finance because you want to get near the printer. And can you blame them? Not really. And so tech and finance were where a lot of the money was. And I think most of us would argue that the financial sector has been bloated. It's grown beyond the size that it should, because that's where the money has flowed to in a fiat currency fractional reserve system. I think in a Bitcoin system, it will be very different. And so I think there will be other aspects of our lives that will change. As an example, I think, we talk about low time preference and high time preference, right? So high time preference means you are an impatient person. You have a very high time preference. If you are low time preference, it means you are very patient. You're willing to sort of build and invest for the long term. Now, there might be times where you have to be either one of those two, or either one of those two. But in today's world, I think we can argue that fiat currency has made us very short-term focused. And it's sort of like, oh, let me scroll the next whatever reel or whatever thing on Instagram and TikTok and whatever the latest thing the kids are watching these days. But what happened to our ability to, pick up a book and focus on that, and focus on doing the really hard work to learn whatever, curriculum it is, whether it's an engineering curriculum or whatever else. I think people have sort of lost a bit of that focus, and it's sort of become like everyone wants to be an influencer, and it's just a weird world that we're in. And I think Bitcoin is an important corrective to a lot of those ills.
One of the things that I've heard you say before is, if all you've got time and energy to do is just hold Bitcoin, that's enough. That's good for you, and that's helpful to just be adding momentum to that. But something that you do personally is invest in Bitcoin companies and help engage and evolve the space in that way. How do you make the decision of what you're going to invest in, whether it's just sitting and holding Bitcoin or picking out an exciting new venture? What's kind of your decision framework?
Yeah, so this is a hard one to be honest, because yes, you're right. I have engaged in investing in Bitcoin companies here and there, and of course I am sometimes an advisor for Bitcoin companies as well. It's a hard one because ultimately beating Bitcoin is the ultimate hurdle rate, and so you have to really think. Yeah, there's a chance this company could outdo Bitcoin at least in the short to medium term. And that does make it difficult. It makes it a very, very high bar. But in the other case, there are times where maybe you don't necessarily think you're going to profit in Bitcoin terms, but you sort of want to help this particular team out because you like what they're doing. You think it's got to, it's going to help more, Bitcoin adoption, this kind of thing. So there are times where those kinds of investments will make sense. I think maybe this cycle, a big thing coming now is the whole Bitcoin treasury companies aspect of it, because in that sense, you can, you're getting levered Bitcoin return. Now, that comes with the caveat, of course, there's risk, right? Because it's levered, it can go levered up and levered down also. But nevertheless, I think if you look at things like the Bitcoin treasury companies like MicroStrategy or now Strategy or MetaPlanet and Semler Scientific and others out there, the question is, will they outdo Bitcoin in Bitcoin terms? And they have a metric called BTC yield. And so that's also kind of an interesting thing. But I definitely would preclude, I would sort of, not preclude, I would sort of first, you must hold a Bitcoin bag, right? Before you even think about any of those things, you must first hold a Bitcoin bag and crucially hold it self-custody, right? Like with your own hardware wallet or your own multi-sig, this kind of thing. And most of, at least the way I see it, most of my savings is in Bitcoin, obviously. And then smaller amounts can go into like Bitcoin equities, right? Whether I think this particular Bitcoin company is going to do well, this kind of thing. So I think that's that to me, or at least that approach makes sense to me. But it is just genuinely a very hard thing. So you have to like think, are you really getting good value in terms of what you're putting in and what percentage of the company you're getting, this kind of thing. And so for that reason, yeah, nowadays I don't do that many investments into Bitcoin companies unless I believe, I think there's going to be some kind of Bitcoin return or the ideological aspect.
For the ones that you aren't so sure they're going to outperform Bitcoin's hurdle rate, what do you have any examples of the kind of like quote impact investments that you've made where you said, hey, this isn't necessarily going to outperform, but I think this is deeply important to the space and I want to be involved in its success?
Yeah, I don't want to say specifics, but I would say just as examples, if they are a company that I think it's helping. Maybe an example would be like if it's helping like peer-to-peer, or if it's helping hodlers sort of stay in Bitcoin, then I think it sort of contributes to the like if it helps in the self-custody case, that's probably an example for me that I think is a good thing, because the point is, if you're ideological about it, you want the network to stay decentralized, and as part of that, you want more people to be able to self-custody, as an example. But yeah, I do want to emphasize though, it's a very small portion. Like most, in terms of what goes into, if I put anything into Bitcoin companies, the vast majority is just held in multi-sig, right? Because I just think that's the obvious thing that most people should do, if they can, because it comes back to that same point. It's just very difficult to outperform Bitcoin.
Totally agree. And it's the same way. I mean, we're in the mining space, so we've got clients who we're walking through this quite a bit. And I always remind people, hey, the goal is not to be the person who ends up with the most miners at the end of the day. It's the person who ends up with the most Bitcoin. And mining can be a great vehicle for that. Maybe you can outperform Bitcoin if you're doing it really well, but never lose sight of the fact that you are here to accumulate Bitcoin, not computers. And if you lose sight of that, you've kind of lost the plot a little bit.
Yeah, exactly. And I think this is a common trap, and I'm sure you've seen it many times, but people come in and they think, oh, I need to like make the thing, right? So then they think, oh, I got to mine, what, and that can sometimes cause people to go down pathways that were just very unprofitable from a Bitcoin perspective, right? And so I'm sure there's a lot of people who you know and people who I know who, if they had, instead of going down the mining path, if they had just literally taken that amount of fiat and just bought Bitcoin and hodled it in their multi-sig, in their cold card or whatever, they would have done better. They would be ahead. Now, do I believe that, let's say, high-performing miners, or if you kind of are timing the cycle well, maybe it's possible. Like if you're, I don't know, I'm not a miner myself, but if I had to guess, it's probably like the top 10 to 25% of miners who are really doing, like, can do well. And then people below that, they might not be.
You've got to have a strategy for sure. And you're totally right. I mean, part of the reason that I started my company was the first two times that I tried to get into mining, I did not outperform. It was a painful crash and burn. And it's largely often not even because of something technical or in the return profile that you got wrong. It's often just choosing to work with the wrong partner or setting up in a geography where, things get seized or they don't run or it's a bad climate. So it becomes an engineering problem. And what I love about Bitcoin and what most people love about Bitcoin is it's this intangible, immortal, uncorruptible asset that isn't subject to all the things that like a rental property would be, where you're depreciating a physical asset. So whenever you get into a space like this, it really is an engineering problem. And if you don't solve it properly, yeah, you're probably not going to outperform Bitcoin. And if you do solve it properly, great. It can be a wonderful journey. And I often tell people that almost as important as just getting the return and actually making money doing it is the understanding of the world around you that comes from getting into the mining space. Because you're dealing with the infrastructure of a new financial system, because you're dealing with computing, because you're dealing with energy dynamics, you're really getting this view into the underpinning layers of how the world operates that I just didn't have beforehand. And I had a, engineering background and plenty of curiosity about the world, but it wasn't until I became a miner that really, the world opened up to me as this beautiful engineering problem to solve of how we use our resources more effectively.
That's one thing. That's one area that I've not been a miner myself in terms of like plugging in rigs and things like this. So I don't have a lot of experience in that. I've done some interviews on it, of course, but it's one area that I just don't have a lot of experience to share.
Oh man, come out and visit us in Oregon. We'll do a site visit with you.
I mean, I've visited sites, but I just kind of saw it as like, do I believe I have a competitive advantage in this? No. So I think I stay out of it. Now, I do totally respect the people who do it for the, like, let's say they want to do the no KYC mining, or the kind of the ideological miner who believes in kind of doing it for the sake of decentralizing the network. And, projects like BitAxe and things like that. But yeah, for me, from a profitability perspective, I've seen so many scams and hacks and things like this over the years. And I've just thought, if I tried this, I'm going to lose sats. And there's not really, now, fair enough if you just took a small amount and you were just kind of like, I'm going to treat this as a learning, okay? Just take buy an old rig and fair enough. But yeah, I just think you eventually hit into, having to think about, okay, sourcing more power and like not getting shut down or whatever. And, it just, yeah. And then kind of being stuck in the cycles of like making sure you bought your miners at a good time, and then also like if my miner, I don't know, I guess I just kind of, maybe I overthought it, or maybe I just maybe I don't know, maybe I made the right assessment to not get into it, because I just thought, well, if I get this miner and it it conks out, it breaks, will I be able to fix it, and will I deal with the noise, and all these things, right? Now, of course, that, I guess it really varies, right? Are you doing home mining? Are you doing kind of small level retail, or are you going to go and try to get like a commercial, like a decent sized site, this kind of thing? I guess I just thought, you know what, I'm just going to focus on earning money, and then earning fiat and buying Bitcoin, or just earning Bitcoin directly. That was how I saw it.
You teed me up for a question perfectly that I already wanted to ask you, and you mentioned I don't have an edge in this, so I don't want to get into it if I don't have an edge. And I totally agree with that. I've got a wealth coach who talks about, most entrepreneurs, they're gonna end up having a huge portion of their net worth in their business because they likely understand that business far more than anybody else. And it's okay to have overexposure to something that you've got high conviction in, high belief in, specialized knowledge that other people don't have. And same in the Bitcoin space. For a Bitcoiner who's been doing this for years and educating in the space, makes total sense to have 100% allocation or even maybe be levered on your 100% exposure to Bitcoin. For someone that is new to the space and doesn't understand what they're getting into, really hard to advise them to do that because just the fear and the misunderstanding or the lack of understanding around what they own could cause them to make a bad decision. So even a really great investment, if you don't have a personal edge or personal understanding, can end up being pretty catastrophic, even if it works out really well on paper on a spreadsheet. So what I wanted to ask you was, for you personally, what do you think your edge or your superpower is in this space?
I guess for me, it's a certain level of curiosity, and I guess I'm known for a certain level of communication ability and, doing interviews. And so I think that's probably my edge, but I mean, I don't want to sound like I'm, up myself or big noting myself or whatever, but I
This
think,
is a safe space.
but yeah, I think that's probably just the aspect of being able to talk to a technical person and then help explain that for a layman. I think that's probably one of the things I'm known for, at least in terms of my podcast. So I would say that's probably where I've done a lot of interviews with, let's say, technical developers, and then I'm helping explain that for non-developer or for a non-developer audience. And funnily enough, a lot of developers like listening to those shows anyway because they want to because I might be the one who asks specific, technical questions or goes into certain rabbit holes of that technology or what that company is building. And then I think I also came with a lot of, at least, focus and years of reading Austrian economics. And so I think that was also an advantage I had going in because I was already predisposed to understanding the idea of, hey, this money could come from the bottom up. It doesn't have to be a top-down money. And so at least that was something that helped me be on the right track there. And so certainly Austrian economics forms a big part of my show. And so that's why I think of my show, really. It's a mix of economics and technology. And so that's really what it is.
If you could have a personal impact in your life, what are you hoping that is?
Hard to say. I think main thing is just that I helped more people learn about these kinds of topics, things like Bitcoin and Liberty. And of course, we all make mistakes, but I hope, people. I hope I helped people learn more on net than the mistakes and the misconceptions I unwittingly put out. But of course, difficult to do when you've been kind of doing shows for so long. But I hope that more people were able to understand Bitcoin because of my efforts with the podcast and writing and whatever else. And I've had a lot of people tell me, yeah, they listen to the show, and you never know who's listening, right? Whether they could be, really, senior people in some corporation or some really high net worth, billionaires or whatever, or just everyday people. So that's probably the main impact I've had so far, but we'll see, what happens in the future. Like maybe number goes up and I get more into investing at that point, right? I think part of it also is coming back to what we were saying earlier about like diminishing returns. I expect, over time, the returns will sort of diminish, and then eventually it may make more sense to do some investing in non-Bitcoin things, and so we'll see what happens then. But I think the way I see it for now, the safest play is to maintain, a decent Bitcoin exposure. I'm not saying everyone has to be all in or whatever. That's a decision for everyone else to make. But I think maintaining a pretty strong Bitcoin allocation, I think that's the smart play for now and at least the medium term future.
I love it. Stefan, I really appreciate you sharing your time with me. It's been super fun to get to know you. And I wanted to wrap up on a slightly more fun speculative question. When we become a multiplanetary species and we've got people living on Mars, are we still going to be using Bitcoin on Mars? And why or why not?
So I've heard basically the answer to this is no. I think Dhruv Bansal did a blog series over at Unchained Capital talking about center of hash. And I think he was saying something like, based on the speed of light, it's just not going to be feasible to have Bitcoin used across Earth and Mars, as an example. And so for that reason, it sounds like it's going to be like Mars coin, right? I guess if you, whoever first one to get to Mars, you get to start your own shit coin or Mars coin, whatever. That's the reward, I guess. That's the bounty for being first. But that said, I think in the same way that if you look back at sci-fi from the 70s and the 80s, they said by today we would have flying cars and we would have, so I just think maybe people get a bit overzealous or ambitious about what's possible and how quickly it's going to happen. So I know Elon is all in on going to Mars, but I'm not sure how feasible it'll be, or like how, there might be challenges that we just don't know how to solve anytime soon, right? It might be like there are things about the way we evolved on this Earth that need us to stay here, and I think there are a lot of things that have to get developed here on Earth before we sort of go traipsing around the solar system. Now, of course, this is not my money. Hey, do what you want with your money if you want to try to go to Mars. But I'm not sure it's going to happen in our lifetimes, or at least, like, I don't know if it'll be like there'll be humans born and like proper sustainable colonies there on Mars or whatever. But who knows?
So if you are the enterprising individual who lands there first, you get to be your new planet's Satoshi and have that honor for yourself.
I guess so. Yeah, I think so. I think, yeah, I guess you got to start building up a network effect, right? Because you can't just like send a drone there, send a rover bot there and start the shitcoin yourself, or start a coin. I guess it's not a shitcoin. You start a legitimate coin. But you need a network, right? Like you need other people to be transacting and this kind of thing. So I guess you can't just kind of be like first by sending a robot there. You kind of have to like, have real commerce happening.
I love it. Stephan, I really appreciate you coming on. Where can people find you, keep up with what you're working on? And again, thank you for coming on. Just really appreciated getting to have you on Hosting Bitcoin today.
Hey, yeah, thanks for having me. StephanLivera.com. People can find me on Twitter, Stephan Livera, YouTube, same Stephan Livera, Spotify, same thing. I'm on Nostr as well. And those are the main places to find me. Of course, find my podcast, Stephan Livera Podcast, focused on economics, technology, and just all things Bitcoin. And yeah, thanks for having me on.
Thanks, Stephan. We're having a lot of crazy things happening really quickly in this space. So I'd love to have you back on and check in maybe in a few months or this coming year.
Sure.
Cool, man. Until next time.